Intersections are those places where life makes up its mind, where we make choices and we wind up on a path or on a different path. There are places in our lives where we decide which way we're going. And over this whole series, we've been kind of unpacking or navigating those critical moments in our life. The first week, we talked about how important the pivot step was. The pivot step is a small intersection that doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's a small action in our life that puts us in a whole different direction. That second week, we kind of unpacked how those intersections, the wisdom we can get in the intersections, like the red light, yellow light, green light kind of stuff, when life's on the go, when you're waiting, when there's kind of a pause in the road. Last week, Chris did an amazing job just kind of unpacking how life can get centered somewhere, sometimes around the wrong things, or what it's like when things get centered around the right things. This week, I want to make you feel or understand that you should be loving this place. This is not a group of people that used to be people like you. And we're not a group of people who just tolerate or put up with people like you. And we're not a group of people who try to fix or change people like you. We're people just like you who've made mistakes, parts of our story that we'd like to edit or delete. There are parts of my story that I wish I could forget ever happened, right? Every single one of us live in a place like that. And it's not uncommon for us to run into folks who feel like they don't feel like they fit into a place like Journey, because they're like, I don't know, if I go to church, the walls will fall down. Well, we made the walls out of like rubber. They're plastic, so that's not gonna hurt you, right? They feel like, man, if I showed up at church, then this is gonna happen. Nobody's gonna accept me. I've got tattoos or I look a certain way. We want you to know something. We care a lot more about your next step than we do your last one. Who you are becoming is more important to us than who you've been. So I want you to know something. If you're trying out this online thing, before you show up in person, I want you to know that when you walk in the door, you'll never find a group of people more happy to see you and more welcoming and accepting than the group of people that occupy this room. We exist to help people like us, you and me, everyday people, take our next step toward Jesus. Because all of us have kind of a cycle we go through in life, right? A place in our life where we're doing good things, we got it kind of dialed in and we're moving forward. And then all of a sudden things fall apart. In the Bible, there's a book called the Book of Judges. Now, in a world like ours today, we use the word judge and it sounds kind of negative. It sounds kind of like judgmental even, maybe you'd think of that. But that's not what this book is about. The book kind of unfolds with a cycle, what we call the cycle of Judges sometimes. And it starts out just like we start out like. We go through periods of our time where we're like, I got it all dialed in. I'm doing good things. I'm making good choices. Maybe if your faith story includes following Jesus, you're following, right? Maybe you remember a time when you were a kid, when you were following Jesus. You were doing the right things, you were doing that. But then all of a sudden, you slept in one Sunday, right? Next thing you know, you're 40. Next thing you know, you've got a couple of kids. You didn't mean to skip 20 years of church, you just did. And there's a part where that cycle turns around and kind of turns a corner. And now you're in that place where you feel ashamed, maybe, or you feel like I can't, or I'm not worthy. Well, we're going to talk about that whole cycle today. It starts in Judges chapter 5, verse 31. It says this: so may all your enemies perish, Lord. This is the Israelites speaking. They're like really big about this. They're really into their faith. They're in that good stride moment. But may all who love you be like the sun when it rises and in its strength. And then the land had peace for 40 years. So for 40 years, the Israelites, like us, you know how we get into those strides where we're like, I followed Jesus when I was a kid, or I was doing the right thing, or I had my addiction, I was kind of working the steps and I was moving forward, or our marriage was moving in the right way. And for 40 years in their story, they just kind of did the right thing. And for 40 years, they had peace, and the whole land kind of existed in stride. But the way this cycle of Judges works is a lot like our cycle, right? For a while, we get it right. We're kind of doing the right thing, and things are going well in our faith story and our life, right? And then we kind of get sidetracked, right? I have ADD faith too. It's not just my personality. It's not just the way my brain works. Sometimes I'm doing really good and I got my eye on the prize and then I'm like, oh, something shiny's over there, right? Something gets my attention and I forget, or I get discouraged, or I get tired, or I get kind of, bored, or I get kind of whatever it is, right? And I find my way off track. This is what happens in the very next verse, the very beginning of the next chapter. It says, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And for 7 years, he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. This is a tough verse Because on one verse, they get this whole idea that things are going good. They're doing right. They're following God. There's living at peace for 40 years. And then the Israelites did evil. They didn't just do an evil thing. They didn't just make a mistake. God doesn't throw judgment on us when we make a mistake. That's the image I had when I was a kid, that God was on this big throne up in heaven. And then he had a lightning bolt, and he was just waiting for a reason to throw it at me. That's not the value or the image of Scripture uses for God. See, the Israelites systematically and completely did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They turned away from this. God, may our enemies, your enemies, fall, and may you be glorified, to this, like, I want to do what I want to do. They did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They began to, like, embody idol worship and all kinds of other things that they put before God. And when he did that, this is a tough passage, and this may rock your understanding. And for 7 years, God, gave them into the hands of the Midianites. He didn't cause their pain. He allowed their pain. Let me say it again. When he gave them into the hands of the Midianites, he didn't make their pain. He didn't cause it. He didn't do it to them. He wasn't trying to punish them. He allowed their pain to get their attention. He allowed them to fall into the captivity, to fall into the oppression of this. And this is the same cycle that has happened over and over again in the book of Judges. They find God, they follow God, peace follows them. They do evil in the eyes of the Lord over generations, and God allows them for a period of time. In fact, a perfect period of time for 7 years. He allows them to experience kind of the fruit of their own actions, and it works out really poorly for them. But here's one of those things that you and I are at in those intersections. When we get in intersections, sometimes we're like, God, why did you allow this thing? Why did you let this bad thing happen to me? Why did you let this bad thing happen to my family? Why is it I'm experiencing these times of trouble? Didn't I make a decision when I was 8? Didn't I follow you when I was 12? Didn't I say all those things? Don't I believe all the right information? Why is it you're allowing this financial crisis? Why is it you're allowing this personal crisis? Why is it this is happening in my life? And this is an important, maybe disturbing fact, a reality, that intersections are battles for your heart, not your comfort. That's hard to accept, hard to swallow. But I want you to know something, and I've learned this over and over again in my life. I've seen it in all of yours, that God is not after you being comfortable. God is after our hearts. He was after the hearts of the Israelites. When he had the hearts of the Israelites, the very best thing he could do is like, listen, I want to do what's right for you. Jeremiah says, the prophet Jeremiah says that God said, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. That's what God wants for our life. But when we choose to do things that are our own motivations, our own way of serving our life, we're bringing in this thing that causes the damage, and God allows it because he is not above leveraging your comfort to get at your heart. Man, Scripture says that we should guard our hearts, the core of who we are, because out of our hearts flows every bit of life. All of life flows out of our hearts. So if our hearts are decayed and it's evil in the eyes of God, like we're doing our own thing, that decay is going to flow out of our heart, and God wants desperately, because the very best thing for us is for God to have our hearts. The story goes on. During those 7 years, whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, the Amalekites, you get it, right? And all the other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped in the land, ruined the crops all the way down to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep, nor cattle, nor donkeys. Look at what it says next. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. You ever been there? You ever been to a place where you're like, man, you get to what we call rock bottom, right? And our only way to move is up, right? You get to the rock bottom of your marriage and you're like, God, please help me, right? You get to the rock bottom of the money and it's all falling apart and you're like, please, God, would you help me? We get to the part where our kid is really sick or we're really sick or we get the wrong health diagnosis, rock bottom. And the only way to look it up, that's exactly where they got to. They got to the place where the Midianites and all these eastern peoples had so oppressed them that they were like, God, I don't have another option. I don't have another way. You know what I was thinking when it comes to intersections? Is we don't have to wait for an accident in the intersection, but we tend to, right? We don't have, all of a sudden, the intersections become much more obvious, whether they're marked with stoplights or just a small sign on the side of the road. They become much more obvious to us when we witness or involved in an accident. Now, here's what I would suggest to you. Like, you don't have to wait for an accident to happen. You don't have to wait to get to rock bottom before you cry out to God and say, God, would you help us? Would you save us, right? We don't have to wait until we get to rock bottom. We can witness an accident in someone else's life in the intersection and use that to say, God, I want more from you. I think this is what we need to do. We don't have to wait to be involved in an accident in the intersection. Today, we can use the Israelites, right? We can look at their story and go, hey, when they're following God and God has their heart, everything seems to work out. Does that mean following God's going to fix all your problems? No, right? Because we live in a broken world. But when we follow God, we're working out his very best plan in our life. And then he doesn't have to leverage or allow our circumstances to get our attention. Sometimes broken things happen because we live in a broken world. But sometimes God allows the broken things to affect us more so that he can get our attention, because he loves you enough to let you be uncomfortable, to get our heart's attention, and it matters. There's a passage coming up here, and it's pretty crazy. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, I brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, and I rescued from the hands of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me. You see what I'm saying? They didn't just do a wrong thing, right? They didn't just, they didn't go to church one week, or they gave 9.5%, or they did something small. They didn't do something wrong and God threw a lightning bolt at them. When they chose to do this, they chose to make another God more important than the God of the Bible, right? The God of Israel said, I want to be most important to you. I'm the Lord your God. Don't worship the gods of the Amorites where you live, but you didn't listen to me. You see, they didn't just do one thing wrong or do an evil in the eyes of the Lord. They pointed their heart's attention entirely to another place. And that's an important distinction, because there's a tendency to think, is God going to yell at me? Is God going to get mad at me because I did something wrong? We're not talking about doing an evil. We're talking about placing our heart's worship at another person's feet. Now, I know you would never say, oh, I would never worship another God. But we do it all the time, don't we? We worship the God of success. We worship the God of people's opinions. We worship the God of popularity. We worship the God of peace in our life. We worship those gods, and we give our heart's attention to things that don't even remotely matter. And God doesn't want that for us. We have to listen to him. If we want to learn from the Israelites' accident in the intersection, instead of waiting for an accident of our own, we have to follow the words of the prophet and remember all that God's done for me and point my heart's attention and go, God, before you have to get my attention, I want to give it to you because it's what's best for my heart. It's what's best for my life. The angel of the Lord, which most theologians believe is Jesus, and came down and sat under an oak in Ophrah, and belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was, this is important, threshing out wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. Now it's important, so get what's going on. Gideon, who's the next judge, Gideon is in this, he's threshing out wheat in a winepress. Now that sounds like just information, doesn't it? Threshing out wheat is the process of separating the wheat from the chaff, the part that is useful for making grain or for making bread, and the part that is useless and needs to be burned up. He's in the winepress threshing it out, but that's not where you'd normally do it. You'd normally do that on the threshing floor. You'd normally do that in a much easier place to see and be observed, but he's hidden down in a place where they press out grapes for wine. He's hidden away from people because he's scared. He's got to just eke out a living, eke out enough grain for his family, and he's literally in hiding This is what's crazy. The angel of the Lord, or Jesus, pre-incarnate Jesus, that's pretty crazy, shows up and finds him threshing out wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said this is so crucial. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. I love that phrase. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Jesus gives Gideon this unbelievable name. You, Gideon, are a mighty warrior, and the Lord is with you, even though you're hiding out in a winepress. There's nothing mighty or warrior-like, right? There's nothing unbelievable. There's nothing able at all for Gideon to be doing. He's hiding out, just trying to eke out enough grain and burn off the chaff and sneak it around so that the Midianites don't see it and take it from him. But instead, he's hiding out and kind of weakening away. But God sees something amazing in him. The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Like it's almost like there's like this tension in the conversation. He says, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel." It's such a juxtaposition, isn't it? It's such a contrast between him hiding in cowardice, threshing out wheat quietly in the winepress, when he's scared of the Midianites, and God in skin, showing up face to face with him and saying, "Gideon, I've given you something amazing. I want you to go in the power that you have and send and save Israel out of Midian's hands." And it's kind of like Gideon just stood there like, huh? It's almost like he says the next sentence. I can almost imagine the picture. Hello, did you hear me? Am I not sending you? Was I unclear, Gideon? You got some stuff to do, man. Get in on it, right? Yeah, it's like what I think of his name as Gideon. Really, it's just about getting in, right? Get in on what I'm telling you, because you have power that I've given you, and I'm calling you to do something bigger, better. I'm calling you to do something outside of this cowardice. I'm calling you to be a mighty warrior. God sees in Gideon what Gideon doesn't see in himself. Excuse me, Lord, right? Pardon me. Point of clarification, angel of the Lord. I have a question, right? I mean, this is exactly what's going on. Remember, he said, "Go in the strength I've given you and save the Israelites from the Midianites." And he's like, "Huh? What are you doing?" And God goes, "Hey, am I not sending you?" And then he says, "Pardon me, just 1 second. Do you have the right place? Right? Did you check into the wrong wine press? Right? I'm not a mighty warrior. You can't possibly talk into me. I don't have any power or strength in my own hands to go save these people." He goes, "How can I even do this? Save Israel. My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family." He's like, "I'm not the best of the best. I'm not your mighty warrior you're talking about. You think I'm a mighty warrior. I just want you to know I'm not a mighty warrior. In fact, I'm not the strongest of the strong. I'm the weakest of the weak." That's what he says. He says, "Get this through your head, Jesus." This is how we do things, isn't it? It's like he's telling him, "Look, you don't know me, right? I know you think you've called me to do something, but you must have picked the wrong dude, guy, because you knocked on the wrong wine press. Because you showed up not for the strongest of the strong, but the weakest of the weak. The guy you're looking for is out there fighting a battle somewhere, not cowering in the wine press." And he says, "My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family." Like, not only is my group of people the weakest, I'm the biggest loser in the bunch. I'm a coward. I'm hiding out in the wine press. When you're facing that intersection, when there's a part in your life where you're going, "Listen, do I have the wisdom to learn from somebody else's accident in the intersection? Or am I just going to make my own accident? Am I going to make my own mess?" I want you to know something, that God sees more in you than you see in you. I can't tell you this enough. This matters to me. It matters to who we are as a church, that God, the creator of the universe, sees more in you than you see in you. Like, you're going, "Oh man, you don't know what my story looks like. You don't know what these hands have touched. You don't know where these feet have been. You don't know what these eyes have seen. You don't know what thoughts parade around in my brain. You don't know what things I've done with my life." God sees more in who you can become than you see in who you've been. Such a powerful and important part of this story, because it's really a picture of the gospel. It's really a picture of what God wants for you. He doesn't want you stuck in your own world where you live out where your own worship happens for the God of success or the God of people's opinions or the God of peace or the God of whatever you want to feel in a thing. It's that he wants your heart's attention because out of it is the wellspring of life, and God sees more in you than you'll ever see in yourself. He believes for Gideon that he's a mighty warrior even though he's acting like a coward. He believes for you in the intersections of your life that you are more than you'll ever be able to understand for yourself. The very beginning of the next thing, God begins to craft Gideon into the mighty warrior he believes he already is. And he says, this is what happens. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many men. You know, Gideon went on from the winepress and he gathered an army, and an army of men. And it says, I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel will boast against me and say, my own strength saved me. God said to him, Gideon, I called you out of the winepress. I said you were a mighty warrior when you were doing cowardly things, right? And I want to call you out. And he got a group of people. He said, but I don't want you to go forward and fight the Midianites with these men. He had 32,000 of them, by the way. I don't want you to go fight the Midianites with these 32,000 men because people will say, my own strength has saved me. So I want you to pare down this group of people. So he says to him, he goes, now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left, while only 10,000 remain. Now get that, right? He makes an announcement. Hey, if you're scared of battle, go on home. It's okay. We're good. Peace, right? Like, deuces, you're good. Catch a ride, call an Uber, right? Get a cab. You guys are free to go. 22,000 of his 32,000 men. Okay, let me do the math for you because it just looks a little bit crazier like this. He had 32,000 men. 32,000 men who were willing to fight on their own. But God said, no. I don't want you to go in with 32,000 men because somebody in this crowd is going to be going, oh, you guys did this on your own strength. So God says, hey, let them off the hook, right? And 22,000 of them go home. They're like, got to go, right? And then down to 10,000 men. Now, have you ever had a problem in your life, an intersection where you're facing, and you're going, hey, you know what, God? Here's what I want. I just want for you to move. I want you to defeat my enemy, right? The enemy of my finances, my relational thing, my whatever, right? And you're going, God, I want you to do this, and here's how I want you to do it. God, I want you to, first, it'd be great if you do this and move this over here. It'd be great if I could make some more money, and I could do this, and I could make that thing. And if he could just get him to think this way, and if you could get her to do that, and it would be great. Like, we give God a strategy. How many of you know that this was not Gideon's strategy? Gideon was pretty comfortable with 32,000 people, right? He was pretty comfortable going, dude, we're going to roll in and we're going to kick butt and take names, right? We're going to knock some stuff out and let God sort it out, right? Like, that's how he was planning on rolling in, but God said, no, I don't want you to do it that way. And I want you to know something. If you want to learn from the mistakes of the Israelites instead of having to have your own accident, you're going to have to realize first that God doesn't fight your battles with your strategy. Now, I got to be honest with you, that's discouraging for me because I think I got a pretty good strategy when it comes to fixing stuff, right? I think I got this lined up or that lined up. I know how to do this thing. I know what order things need to happen because I'm living in it. It's my life. But isn't that exactly what got the Israelites in the wrong place in their story? It wasn't just that they did an evil thing. It's that they had given their hearts over to something else. And isn't that what we do? Isn't that really what our worship is? Our worship isn't what we bow down and sing to. Our worship is what we give our attention to. And isn't this at the core of what our strategies are? Isn't this at the core? Telling God to fight our battles with our strategy, isn't at the core of our worship? Where we just go, God, I want to do what you want to do, how you want to do it. So understand something. If you're facing a battle, an intersection, a thing in your life that you're going, God, I need you to overcome this. I need you to get through this safely. I need you to make this happen. That understand God's not going to fight your battles with your strategy. His strategy doesn't make sense to us, but it does make sense. Hold on a second. Watch what happens next. But the Lord God said to Gideon, there are still too many. 10,000 was too much, right? There are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there. If I say, this one shall go with you, you shall go. But if I say, this one shall not go with you, you shall not go. So he's saying, basically just going, hey, listen, 10,000 is too many. There's still too many people who could say, with 10,000 people, you could defeat the Midianites. And they could say, you did this on your own power. But God's like, that's not how it's going to work. So Gideon took them down to the water. And there the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. So think about it. Takes the 10,000 men down and saying, hey, let's go get something to drink. And he just lets them go. Doesn't explain it to them. Doesn't tell them there's a test. Right? Just puts them down there. And the guys who put their face down in the river and lap it up like a dog are different than the guys who scoop up the water and drink it out of their hands. Separate them and send them away. If they lap up water like a dog, because look what he says, 300 of them drank from their cupped hands, lapping like dogs. Now, I got to be honest with you. When I see this, I go, I guess I'm a cupped hands guy, because the idea of me sticking my face in the water and lapping it up like a dog doesn't make a ton of sense to me. So I'm kind of thinking that maybe God got rid of the 9,700 really stupid people, but I don't know. And all the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, right? He said, 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give you the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home. 300 of them is what's left. It's crazy. They drank from their cupped hands and lapped it up together like they drank it and looked around. Maybe God was saying, hey, those are the people who are willing to keep an eye out for what's going on around them rather than blind themselves in their circumstances. Isn't that really what we do sometimes? We blind ourselves in our circumstances instead of looking for what God might do, keeping our heads up. That's really pretty crazy math. Started out with 32,000 men on their own strength, took away 22,000 of them, leaving them with 10,000. Knocked out 9,700 of them, leaving them 300 men that are willing to fight with God's strength. You know what this is? It's not a lot of people, right? 300 men from 30-something thousand. It's like 10% to me. What's crazy about it is that God doesn't just fight your battles doesn't fight your battles with your strategy. God doesn't fight your battles with your resources. My guess is you're facing something right now that you're going, man, I don't know if I have what it takes to overcome this. I don't know if I can stay committed to my marriage in the middle of this mess. I don't know if I can pull all this together in our finances. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I have what it takes. And I love that phrase in the song we sing, Lord, I don't have what it takes unless you show up. Unless you show up, this equation is amazingly imbalanced. And that's what I love about that math equation, is that it's imbalanced, completely in favor of the enemy, isn't it? But God shows up. 300 plus God is more than enough, isn't it? 300 plus God is more than enough. 27 years ago, Sheila and I started our journey together. Maybe a little more than that. We started dating, we were married, engaged for a year, and we've been married almost 27 now. In those 27 years, we have been faithfully committed to giving. I know this seems out of nowhere, but there were times, a lot of times, where giving made no sense. When we first started tithing 10% of our income, I made $11,200 a year. Now, you know two things, right? It's hard to live on $11,200. And you know the second thing is my $120 that I was going to give that $1,100 that I would give in a year's time to our church did not matter. Those are pretty crazy things when you think about it, right? I think like I'm living on 90% of nothing, and I'm giving away 10% to a church that doesn't even probably notice that I've given like $100 a month. Does that even matter? But our faithfulness proves that God just shows up. There were many, many times where the 2 + 2 needed to equal 7, and somehow it did. We never paid a bill late, even one time, working hard through all of those really difficult years, because God always seemed to provide. And a principle that we understood is that God didn't fight our battles with our strategy or our resources. And a phrase that we've lived by for all those years is 90% with God's blessing is more than 100% without it. What Gideon learned was 10% with God's blessing is more than 100% without it. That the battle didn't belong to the Lord because he loaned it to Gideon. The battle belonged to the Lord, and he was using Gideon. So let me just encourage you as you're at this last intersection in this series. Will you have the wisdom to see somebody else get in an accident? Will you have the wisdom to see Israel pointing their hearts away from God and God doing whatever it took to get their attention back to him? Will you have the wisdom to learn from their accident and see the battle that's in front of you and know that God's not going to fight it with your resources or your strategy, and that a small amount, your power, right, with God's blessing is more powerful than all of your power without it. God has you. I know you need to hear that again. Let me say it again. God has you. He doesn't define you by your yesterday. He doesn't look at your story and go, you're discounted or worthless. God looks into your eyes while you're hiding out in the wine press, threshing out wheat and hiding from your enemies, and says, you, mighty warrior, am I not calling you? Live life well through that intersection.